онлайн-трансляція на Ютубі, на Фейсбуці.
It's August 21. Ukraine Media Center starts its operation. My name is Svetlana Shaparenko, and just half an hour ago, Verkhovna Rada supported the ratification of Rome Statute. So today's event will be very relevant because now we will have a presentation of survey findings, justice in the context of Russian armed aggression, assessments and sentiments of the military, and we will focus on Rome Statute in particular. So let me introduce the panelists today. Oleksiy Antypovych, head of the Sociological Group Radian, Arie Mora, Communications and Advocacy Manager at Ukrainian Legal Advisory Group, and Maksym Yelihulashvili, expert at the Ukraine 5 AM Coalition. So, Mr. Oleksiy, let me give the floor to you. I'm curious, how was the survey going on? Because surveying the active military, I mean not the veterans, but the active military is a hell of a challenge. So how was the survey going on, and what were the complications on your way? Well, first of all, I would like to say that the topic, well, not the topic, but surveying of the active military is in high demand, and as sociologists, it's an ongoing challenge for us. We continue performing different types of surveys, but thanks to the cooperation with the colleagues, we were able to, probably not for the first time, but we were able to come up with quite a complex material based on the survey of the active military. It's really a difficult category to reach out to, because you understand that to get a representative drawdown, you cannot survey the active military who stay in the hospitals, for example, or in the rear. In order to get their representative drawdown, you have to cover quite a broad number of active military who stay in the front lines, who have combat experience. Some of them do not have combat experience. There are people in our drawdown who have experience of captivity, let alone staying in hospital. And our survey represents different ranks, from privates all the way up to sergeants and commissioned officers. We had to cover different people in terms of their drafting period, whether they were drafted before the year 22 or after the year 22, from different branches. So we were trying to make the coverage as broad as possible in terms of available criteria, because the actual statistics is not available for us, like what is the total number of the military in a country, what regions do they represent, and so on and so forth. This is why our drawdown was equally dispersed all across Ukraine, and we were trying to dilute, so to say, our drawdown during survey of the military. And during the survey we were facing the questions like, what is it for, why are you doing this, and how am I as an active military, and to what extent am I as an active military able to give any comments, because I have job descriptions or like field regulations, so there is certain specifics about this. But since we have been working for a long time as a sociological survey group, we were definitely able to make it. It took us pretty long time, and we got quite an extensive material covering quite a complex topic, justice in the context of Russian aggression. It's a specialized topic, but on the other hand, it's really complex, because whether it's civilians or the military, they still may be not aware of some things. So again, I would like to thank our colleagues for their holistic approach, and I hope that this survey will be used for a long time in our Ukrainian realities. Thank you. So let's proceed to the results of the survey. What were your findings? I think my colleagues may tell more about that, but let me tell you some basic things. We covered 660 active military. Some of them were staying in the front line, some in the rear. It was a face-to-face formalized interview methods. The error does not exceed 4%, and the period of the survey was from 25th of July until the 12th of August. And for introduction, let me give you some figures which are interesting to me as sociologist. 36% of the military think that the things in Ukraine are moving the right way. However, 50% think that the things are moving in the wrong way. But let me tell you that the military are a little bit more optimistic than the civilians, because basically the period when the majority of Ukrainians were thinking that the things are going the right way is over, and then now the majority thinks they are going the wrong way. But at the same time, there is something that gives us more hope. Like when we were asking the question, how do you see the future of Ukraine? 70% of the military said that they see our future as hopeful, so it's quite a positive evaluation. And on this positive note, I would like to give the floor to my colleagues. Well, if you allow me, Mr. Oleksiy, just one small question. Talking about the positive outlook of the military, their optimistic outlook, why do you think their expectations are higher than the civilians? Is it related to some confidence of the military, like they're fighting for the victory with their own hands, or is it related to the fact that they stay in a less saturated media space? Well, I think that their information space is even more saturated, but it's a different kind of information space. You know, those are reports, losses of the enemy. I think the military know more about that, but it's not a matter of whether what they know something or not, but it's a matter of faith in our ability to stand for our ground, stand for our country, and our ability to fight that big enemy and win. But as you put it correctly, the active military, on top of what I've said, they take efforts to achieve that, because people who live in the rear, they definitely donate, they get concerned, they read the news, but they don't take direct part in the combat operations. Meanwhile, the military, they know what it looks like, and they fight. You know, for them it's a matter of life and death, and they fight not only for their own life, but for the life of their brothers in arms, their arms, their families, and it allows them to have more optimistic outlook of their future. Mr. Maksym, so let's get back to the survey. So the topic of the day is the Rome Statute. So let's talk about that. What is the attitude of the active military to ratification of the Rome Statute, and to what extent it would satisfy their demand for justice? Thank you very much. You've just announced that, if I'm not mistaken, 281 people's deputies voted for ratification, and it was a long way to official admission of Ukraine to this process. However, jurisdiction of International Criminal Court started in Ukraine with the armed aggression of Russian Federation against Ukraine in year 2014. So formally we've already proceeded to it, and it was like a proto-announcement or a spoiler that the survey of the military, like Mr. Oleksiy mentioned about the complexity, we didn't boil it down to the Rome Statute, but we were trying to provide more of a broad, holistic picture of memorialization, justice, and other aspects, and we were attempting to make a complex sections, so to say. So it's only one of the small fragments of that survey that was held, and in the beginning of September we will be able to see the whole survey, the biggest survey that will allow us to see the way the justice is seen by the military from different standpoints. So talking about the ratification of the Rome Statute, I think that there is a huge it's a huge hello to the people's deputies of the previous convocations and some civil organizations who were saying that the ratification of the Rome Statute does not comply with the vision of the military. And it's really convenient when you don't ask the group access to which is complicated, and based on that you may build your arguments, approaches, and build a lot of myth, because surveying the civilians who were surveyed in a couple of ways, I will get back to this issue, the civilians don't have critical perception of the Rome Statute. You can see it on the screen. The same thing is about the military. It's important, in my opinion, to understand that the full support is 37%, mostly support 34%. So basically we have half of those surveyed who don't see ratification of the Rome Statute as a problem. So basically saying that the military are against, that statement cannot be confirmed by the data that is available to us. And what's critically important for me is that we don't have significant gaps between commissioned officers, sergeants. However, the knowledge also included the questions to what extent people will the information. And here you see that the level of support of ratification of Rome Statute in the group that is aware of the Rome Statute is 60%. So it's again about the manipulation of data, but totally not of knowledge. So again, another component, another mega important myth that was discussed, that there was a strict connection between the jurisdiction of ICC and that it can be used against Ukraine. So as we start talking about the aspects of that component, Ukrainian parliament expanded the jurisdiction in year 2014. So basically, if the prosecutors had that opportunity, the prosecutors of ICC, within these 2 years, there was space to start investigations, to initiate investigations. And for me, as a citizen, as we talk, what is the way we want a country to look like, in these surveys about justice, the figures that talk about the standards of the justice give me some hope. It says that it should be an instrument that ensures justice no matter in whose relation. And as we see the figures, we understand that for the military it's about the competitive process and guarantees that the top-level government officials of Russian Federation can be brought to liability. And the level of this support we see at 58%. That's why this moment of ratification, well, it's like, it's a good document, let's ratify it. But here we're talking about the consequences. We talk about expansion of the investigation on the Ukrainian part, and it creates foundation to make sure that those who initiated the armed conflict are brought to liability. And in the same way as we see the zones of responsibility, here they are on par. President of Ukraine 40%, Parliament of Ukraine 40%. So who has the primary responsibility? So now the Parliament made that pass further on, and hopefully it will be signed by the President. But again, getting back to some encouraging scenarios, Mr. Oleksiy mentioned the encouraging vision of the future by the military. For me, as a person who works with the justice, those aspects like readiness to comply with the justice standard, like President and the Parliament should be equally responsible for taking those decisions. But when we've asked based on which, we've got the vision not of the military or military command, but it should be a public opinion. And as we refer to those surveys that we were doing, like with the civilians, the percentage reached the same level. And the parliament, for the first time in the context of the Rome Statute debates, focuses their attention not on the myth and political manipulations, but clearly understanding that public opinion offers this, the military suggests this. There is a match. The priority is on the side of public opinion, because we're talking about the state as it is. And in the same way, talking about the growth zones, here there is a quite visible demand for level of awareness. We were talking about the information space, and definitely the investigation of war crimes by ICC is not in the focus. We can see it in the figures, quite a low level, about 20%, and the awareness index is 1.4. That basically is not a high index. And at the same time, as we talk about the efficiency of the investigation, then the figures are growing. Not so much, that's pretty clear, but basically we get 30% as a focus assessment in the context of efficiency in terms of those aspects which are critically important for the military. And to finalize it, on my end, as we talk about the priorities and demands, as we were building the questionnaire, we were thinking about the priorities, accents, and how not to manipulate, but rather check the relevancy, whether there is understanding of context and the real situation by the military. So talking about the advantages of ratification of the Rome Statute, there were a couple of suggestions, and the key ones, they link to the previous demand that was mentioned about the readiness for the sake of bringing to liability the government officials of Russian Federation, the liability for war crimes. That's the first item, 38%. And secondly, that the reform is a chance, is a real historic chance to reform criminal justice in Ukraine. So it's not only about bringing them to liability, which is clear because they fight for peace for Ukraine, and thus the justice for violation of international law. But another aspect is that it's a historical opportunity for Ukraine to reform its justice system, its judicial system, and to add international experience there. So talking about the risks here, we can verify that aspect related to the fact that it's a disturbing question. It's a disturbing issue that ICC will investigate all of the crimes, no matter which party committed it. And some people understand that it's a reputational risk for Ukraine. But getting back to the previous questions, whether you are ready to prioritize, whether you are ready to ratify it for the sake of justice, the military say yes. And it's a positive signal for me coming from the military, meaning that we're dealing with a certain level of awareness and a conscious choice here. So it's a stale choice that they make. Thank you, Mr. Maksym. Mr. Arie, let's move on to you, and let's talk about the demand for justice on the part of military. What is the way they see the justice, and how do they see the justice right now? Well, thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. So I will be the fourth one who who says this, that it's a good opportunity, but still, as we talk about ratification of the Rome Statute, in reality, it's such a manifestation of this aspiration to justice, because at the same time, starting from the year 2014, ICC, the International Criminal Court, was such a... it became a hope for the society, a hope for justice, a hope that those who are the most liable, the most guilty, will be brought to liability, but at the same time it has become a significant challenge to evaluate the readiness of the society. So basically this justice, like international justice, cannot be a matter of manipulation. It's whether justice or not justice. And in this context, this survey, well, we really are concerned with the fact that the opinion of the military is being manipulated, not only instrumentalized to promote some political solutions, but previously we already had interviews with the representatives of the veterans community, and the partners did such surveys before, and we were observing a tendency for quite clear support of the Rome Statute ratification. And this survey in those terms also demonstrates that, in fact, such support of ratification of the Rome Statute directly correlates with the fact that the priorities seen by the military, the priority for the military is to punish those guilty of the heaviest crimes, because in the context of the justice, second thing is compensation of losses, and then other aspects. What does it tell us in the context of these slides that we've already mentioned, and what Maksym has just said, is that the society, our society, is changing, but at the same time, ratification of the Rome Statute, it was a little bit mired in time, because sometimes people were not understanding to full extent the nature of this court, what are the relations between Ukraine and ICC, and some were saying that we should not permit it, prevent it. So unfortunately, irrelevant arguments were used that were reflected by the law, by the articles of international law and common reason, but at the same time we had this veiled resistance that we cannot make our way around, because how can we do that? And the tendencies we were observing, the results, the findings of this survey, they demonstrate significant shift in terms of how the military see the justice, and where should we aspire, correlating with the attitude of the society to the same matter. What's important here is that the military think that the key role in this process should be played, and is played, by the President of Ukraine. We see it by the initiation of ratification of the Rome Statute, and even before that draft law could be brought to Parliament, even regardless of some resistance. And right now we're at the point where we were able to overcome that problem, and International Criminal Court is second here according to survey findings, which means that in the view of the military, ICC is one of the key components of the justice system. So how this system is built, that is aimed to make sure that those who commit the most crimes are brought to liability. So in top 4, you can see there are also armed forces of Ukraine and the Ukrainian society, the citizens of Ukraine, which is also an important aspect because realization of this agency is critically important in our opinion, but it should be supported by our aspiration to make sure that this agency and subjectivity is open, honest, and aware. And it was the problem that existed during previous years, that the opinion of some military, active military, or military in general, was that their opinion was generalized. The military were not admitted to the discussion, just like the Ukrainian society. So we didn't have that actor. We didn't have the full picture and the actor who could take part in this discussion. And here was important, quite an important aspect. In part, it overlaps the data that was mentioned by the colleagues before, something related to what liability exactly the military contemplate for the war crimes. And now we see the draft law that was voted and which will hopefully be signed by the president. And it has one important component, Article 124 in this draft law. It's Article 124 of the Rome Statute that Ukraine uses ratifying the Rome Statute. It means that ratifying the Rome Statute, Ukraine can, well, it may or may not revoke the jurisdiction of International Criminal Court over the war crimes, and as it is formulated in the draft law, for the crimes that were committed by or could be committed by the citizens of Ukraine within the 7 years. Quite a controversial provision. We've seen a lot of analytics, both legal and geopolitical, but we will definitely find it out after the court makes their position known to everybody. So those ideas were in public discussion because they are a compromise to reduce the risk that the society and the military, first of all, do not want to see in the dock of ICC the citizens of Ukraine. So this survey proves that at least that's not necessarily so, and the representatives of the Ukrainian military have more profound and I could even say more mature and balanced understanding and vision of what justice should look like. And the slide related to the fact that the military realized that ICC can bring the Ukrainian military command to liability without ratification of Rome Statute, and this slide that says that for the sake of opportunity to bring to liability the military command and government officials of Russian Federation, they are ready to support the investigation of the war crimes committed by the military command of Ukraine. It demonstrates that the idea itself that the crimes could be committed by both parties and this is a matter subject to justice exists among the military, and we have to take it into account. It means that right now for us it's important to have this discussion on a more profound level, on a broader level, so we could see to what extent is it a problem or is it not? Because no matter what bias exists in the society, that like all of the military will be against having any criminal proceedings initiated against Ukrainian military, probably we should not have added the Article 124 to the draft law. So basically this is one important moment, because there are a lot of speculations and manipulations about that. Some may try to use this information as polarizing, but it's not a matter of polarization or attempt to bring someone to liability for something, but it's about that principle, it's about the inclination of the military, it's about the holistic justice that says that those who commit the war crimes should be brought to liability. And what's important too is that, first of all, those slides demonstrate that not only national justice, in the opinion of the military, at least not all of the military think that Ukrainian courts, so to say, can review those cases, but it also demonstrates that the justice architecture can not only be made of national courts, because we don't have such a capability, and other issues related to capability of Ukraine to cover all that huge massive of crimes. But it also says that among the military there is no such bias, that no one can judge us but ourselves. And then another important issue is that review of the cases in international criminal courts to some faulty extent is associated with the idea that no one's gonna make it in Ukraine, like Ukraine cannot make it. We really have challenges in terms of justice in Ukraine. We have to be conscious about that, and we have to look for solutions that can address those problems. But what's important is that the fact of activity of ICC is not about I'm about to finalize now. So it's not about the fact that the state cannot administer justice, but it's more about the fact that the International Criminal Court complements the efforts of the state where they don't have opportunity or desire to exercise such justice. And here on this slide I will probably stop. The last important thing is that in continuation of this question, who can administer the justice in the opinion of the military, the serious support on the side of specialized courts with the participation of national and foreign judges. So again, the architecture of justice is made of a number of components. We are not going to be able to get ourselves limited with national justice system and ICC. Probably we will need the specialized course, and it's an important sign of support of such solutions. And the draft law on ratification, it was also supported with the draft law on implementation of the Rome Statute in the national legislation. And I surmise, I haven't seen the news, but I surmise it will be voted for and adopted. But as Maksym mentioned, one of the key advantages related to the ratification of the Rome Statute, in the opinion of the military, is the improvement or the reform of the national justice system and legislation. And it's only possible if the implementation is going on a quality level. I know that there were difficult solutions taken to make sure that those draft laws are still being considered. So this opinion should strengthen the government in their opinion to implement the Rome Statute. Thank you very much. We understand that the Rome Statute is not a document that would be ratified soon and everybody will get happy and then it's over. It's just the beginning of the complex process. And to what extent your invaluable survey, I mean, no one was taking the survey among the military, so how it's going to be used in this process of reformation and changes, improvement, bringing in compliance with the international standard, I mean the judicial system in Ukraine. Well, what I want want to add that this is basically the framework, because in coordination with RATE in 5 a.m. coalition is beyond 3 years of the full-scale invasion, and we were making measurements among the civilians, because it's not only the matter of architecture, the system and mechanics of justice as it is, but also about ensuring the demand for the justice, because the mechanism may be in place, but it may not ensure the vision of justice and the demand for justice. And the results of this survey is what we want to match with what we did in July, and to take a more of a complex look at this problem, and to communicate with different law enforcement agencies, with the expert community, civil society, in terms of building this component, because it's important to understand that the challenges related to war crimes are responded by Ukraine starting from the year 2014, and the fact that we've ratified, I hope we will ratify the Rome Statute, it does not remove those previous years, and we have to unite the previous achievements, something that was achieved by the investigation agencies, and to scale it up to radically increased number of cases, and really to identify the priorities. Because during the previous presentation we were saying that the system is not gonna make it if they try to take it all. The system is overheated with the excessive expectations and attempts of manipulations, and in my opinion this survey, the fact that it's done as the parliament votes for ratification, it's about lost opportunities, because Ukraine previously could influence it due to with the number of political decisions. You know, we had a limited opportunity of influence of this institution, and this is one of the key lessons when we talk about the justice and the Russian aggression. It's such a rationalized, cynical analysis of what we can afford, what are the most efficient terms, and you know, the dream of mind bears monsters, so we don't want to get into this myth area, because in my opinion the findings of this survey were encouraging, because it's balanced. We see high level of emotional responses, like, I apologize for spoilers, but as we try to talk about some particular things, the demand for justice, like, you know, it may be decreasing a little bit, so we orient at the rule of law. When as we survey the civilians, is the chance that the politicians and law enforcement should make use of. Well, let me add just a couple of things to what Maksym has just said. What we're hoping for and what we're going to work for is to make sure that the findings of this survey are taken into account in further discussions, because the fact that the draft law was adopted is only the beginning of discussion. We've seen a lot of resistance before, and definitely it will continue. And as we see the comments to opposition of ratification of Rome Statute, unfortunately, they lack, well, talking specifically about the defense of different parties, no matter how long you postpone it, it's not going to work, but because it's about the justice in general, and even reaction to the Article 124 on part of those who were against ratification, it only demonstrated that it's not going to change anything. Well, our people can be persecuted, if not now, maybe later, is not quite correct in terms of the way this article operates, but it's about the sentiment. And in this context, as Maksym has just said, we will continue publishing the results of the survey, and we want to make it a part of a more broad discussion about what our judicial system architecture should look like, what should be the decisions made on the national level, probably on international level, to complement the system, to make it more efficient. And basically another survey that we were presenting the English version in June this year, and we will present it in September, the evaluation of capabilities or evaluation of needs of the judicial system of Ukraine, quite a complex survey, and together they will complement each other to create the full picture in the context of how this discussion should evolve. Thank you very much, Mr. Oleksiy. I wanted to ask you, and you definitely have a remark to this, so do you think it's necessary to make such measurements in future? Because after our victory, Russia is not going to disappear. Definitely those crimes that they've committed will remain actual, but Ukraine and its military will end up in a different reality, so those demands may change in future. Is there a need to update the surveys like this? Well, first of all, us as a rating sociological group, we continue doing different surveys from the early days of the war, and we deem it necessary to inform the expert crowds, citizens and the government about the sentiment, any sentiment that is of concern to everybody, something that we live with for the last 3 years. But for me as a sociologist, it's #1 topic, because the demand for justice on part of Ukrainians is extremely high. It existed even before the war, but it didn't have such an existential value, because the survival in the war with such huge enemy as Russians contemplates that we have to fight and we have to achieve justice. So this demand for justice is extremely broad. Today we were talking about Rome Statute, International Criminal Court, but as we go down to the ground, to the average citizens, it's the demand for justice. It's about fighting corruption. It's about the correct management solutions on part of the government. It's obviously justice during the war. Definitely the war crimes should be investigated and punished for, and they may not only be committed by the Russians, but by our military too. So the demand for justice is a holistic topic. It's a holistic area that we will all keep monitoring, journalists, experts, sociologists, and it's going to be more broad than just a legal plane or political plane. You know, it's such a comprehensive topic that remains like pressing now. Well, thank you very much. Quite an interesting survey, quite an interesting conversation. Let me remind everybody that we just had a presentation of the findings of the survey called Justice in the Context of Russian Armed Aggression, Assessments and Sentiment of the Military. Ukraine Media Center is going to continue tomorrow. Thank you. Stay tuned.